Sometimes I get a challenge that doesn't seem too crazy on the surface, but after thinking about it, it becomes really interesting. And so, hello, my name is Matt, and welcome to my hidden nerdy side, and today we're tackling Bullywugs. So looking at the monster manual on page 35, there are a few cool things about Bullywugs that can help mold our encounters. Bullywugs are evil, hungry frog people who live in swamps and other damp climates, giving us a cool setting to work with. They also tend to raid together and overwhelm their opponents with numbers rather than singular power, giving us an idea of their combat mentality. They're also extra stealthy in swampy terrain and fairly mobile in the swamp with their 40 feet of swim speed and standing leap of 20 feet long and 10 feet high, which could lead to some spicy ambushes. Another cool thing is they communicate via croaking and can use this ability to speak with frogs and toads, who will help them defend their territory by passing along messages. So think about tossing in random croaking noises the further your players travel into their land. Also, what I think is the coolest and funniest feature is their social hierarchy. Bullywugs see themselves as the rulers of all swamps, and the leader of a Bullywug tribe is even called the Lord of the Muck. But on top of that, all Bullywugs have different titles depending on their place in the hierarchy, and are expected to bow down and grovel before their superiors. So coming up with crazy titles to give your froggy boys and role-playing in this over-the-top medieval court-like way could be super fun for you and your players. This is actually further exemplified when you look at what they do to prisoners in their land, because instead of simply killing trespassers, they will bring them back to their main camp before their leader and humiliate them by forcing their participation in shows for their amusement. But once the Bullywugs have asserted their dominance, the captives will then perish. There are plenty of other cool facts, but these are the ones we'll be using for our encounter, so make sure to check out the rest on page 35 in the monster manual. But anyways, let's build your next Bullywug encounter. This encounter/quest will be aimed at parties level 2 to 5, depending on how difficult you want to make it, and last about 2 to 3 sessions, depending on how long you want to stretch it out. The party's motivation should always be tailored to your campaign, but for simplicity's sake, we'll say this will be one of your party's first quests as a new group, which is already a powerful self-motivation since they'll want to explore the new world. But they will also be promised a sizable reward for their efforts, whether it be gold, a favor, or whatever. So, there will be 2 jobs on a bounty board in whatever town your players are in. One will be from Lord Cavan, the ruler of the land, and the other will be from a mystery woman who is hanging out in a tavern on the outskirts of town. Our nobleman, Lord Cavan, will be planning an invasion on a different lord's land, who we'll call Lord Miser. Unfortunately, the only clear-cut way to get into Miser's land is through a mountain pass that Miser controls, so even though Cavan has twice as many men, he would get obliterated if he went that way. However, on the border of their land is a swamp. Now, it would take a bit of effort to cross over it, but it would allow Cavan to bypass the mountain trail and invade Miser's land with ease. The problem is, there is a tribe of Bullywugs who live in the swamp, and Cavan doesn't want to risk losing a big chunk of his forces before his invasion, so he's hiring your party to make sure the Bullywugs won't be a problem. He doesn't care if your party kills them or convinces them to stand aside. He just doesn't want them to be a problem when he crosses the swamp in 2 weeks' time. Cavan will then offer your players a pretty generous reward, and then offer terms your players can give the Bullywugs if they choose the diplomatic route. For example, he could tell your players to offer the Bullywugs 2,000 gold and 200 acres of land, but say they can go as high as 4,000 gold and 500 acres. But you know, choose whatever you want. Now, if your players visit the other job posting, they will come across an agent of Lord Miser named Mel. She has been spying on Cavan, and she will ask your party to do the opposite of what Cavan wants, as she will pay your party to convince the Bullywugs to fight against Cavan when he invades. So, your players have 3 obvious choices. 1. Kill the Bullywugs. 2. Convince the Bullywugs to stand aside and let Cavan invade. Or 3. Convince the Bullywugs to fight against Cavan. Mel will then tell your players players what to offer the Bullywugs for their cooperation. But what's important to note is what Miser will pay your players, and the Bullywugs will be half of what Cavan is offering, which will be a nice test for your party to see where their loyalties lie. So if Cavan will pay your party 500 gold and the Bullywugs 2,000, Miser could only afford 250 and 1,000. But another factor that can affect which side your party falls on is what the two lords stand for. This part I'll leave up to you, but if Cavan is really evil and your players are a bunch of goody two-shoes, well, maybe they're okay with taking a lesser reward. But if your lords are neither good or evil and just have a personal grudge, this decision will be much more difficult to make, which will be quite intriguing. But in order for this quest to have campaign-long consequences, we need to decide what happens when Cavan wins or if Miser fends him off. If Miser fends off Cavan, maybe your world will stay relatively the same, or maybe something from Miser's land becomes quite prominent in your campaign. Something that would have been destroyed if Cavan invaded, like let's say an old ancient church. But if Cavan wins, he will take over Miser's land, and there will definitely be consequences. For example, maybe both of their lands are famous for their metalwork, so if Cavan takes over, he has a monopoly on blacksmithing, and all swords and armor are now branded with his mark and maybe even increase in price as a result since there are no other suppliers. However, it could also be even more sinister, such as Miser ruling the land of elves and Cavan ruling the land of dwarves, and once Cavan invades, dwarven superiority will reign supreme. Whatever you decide on, just make sure its effects can be easily spotted by your players. For example, if you go with our dwarf versus elf idea, show the dwarves treating elves like crap later on in your campaign. On the flip side, if Miser fends off Cavan, when your players walk through Miser's land, have a bunch of happy-go-lucky elves basking in the freedom they still possess. But anyways, let's get to the cool stuff and talk about the swamp portion. Within a couple of hours into the swamp, your players will start to hear the croaking of frogs and toads. This will seem like just a detail to your players, but you will know it's the amphibians signaling to the bullywugs that intruders have entered. Then when your players are sleeping, the bullywugs will ambush your party. I'm gonna recommend you attack with at least 15 bullywugs, and maybe even up to 20, 25, or even 30 depending on the size and skill of your party. Now you might hear this and think, Matt, what are you smoking? A low-level party will get shit-stomped by that many bullywugs. And you're right, but that's okay, because our bullywugs aren't going to kill your players. They're going to knock them unconscious and bring them back to their leader. Now this can be avoided if your players are able to persuade your bullywugs to bring them back to their leader without violence. But either way, your players are going to get where you need them to go. However, persuading them will be difficult since bullywugs can't speak common, but hey, it will be interesting if they can pull it off. Also, if your players do end up beating the odds and winning, that's okay too. That just plays into the killing all the bullywugs route even more. Now, if your players do end up winning, they can systematically work out a plan to defeat all the bullywugs and take part in a more traditional encounter. But if they're taken into the bullywug camp, either by force or by being led by the ambushers, your players will see dozens, if not hundreds of bullywugs in this massive settlement. The bullywug ambushers will take your players to see Cromug the Damp, the bullywug directly under Borgosh, also known as the Lord of the Muck. After paying their respects to Cromug by bowing and so forth, Cromug will be the only bullywug who can speak common, and he will demand to know what your players want. Your players will tell him, and Cromug will say it's up to Borgosh whether or not they take their deal. Now, Borgosh doesn't speak to pathetic trespassers such as your players, but he will hear them out if they can become champions of the croakolympiad. What is the croakolympiad? Well, it's a series of games that are actually rather simple, since bullywugs are not the most intelligent. Your players will be taken to a coliseum-like pit, and dozens of bullywugs, Borgosh, and Cromug will croak in excitement. And in the pit will be your players and two other teams of bullywugs, both equal to your party's size. Borgosh will then announce the games in bullywug, and Cromug will translate for your players. Now, the games your party will participate in can be totally customizable based on your party stats and abilities. I'm choosing mine based on on the assumption they are a party of 4 with a strong character, a sneaky character, an intelligent character, and a charismatic character. These games are vague enough to work for any party, but whichever games you choose, try and tailor each one to a strong suit of one of your players so everyone gets a chance to shine. Because these games are going to be independent, where your party chooses one team member to participate, and once a member participates, they can't participate again. The winner of each round gets 3 points for their team, second place gets 2, and last gets 1. And finally, it is possible to tie, so take that into account. So the first game will be a classic strongman challenge. There will be a wooden hammer and a lever with a flat surface on one end and a frog on the other. The participants will get 2 chances to hit one side of the lever and send the frog flying as high as they can, and the highest frog flung wins. Picture a weird version of a strongman bell ringing challenge you see at carnivals and you'll get the gist of it. Next will be a riddle challenge where competitors will answer 3 riddles and will have 60 seconds to think about each one. Now remember, bullywugs aren't bright, so feel free to Google 3 riddles that are honestly pretty damn easy. Not only does this fit thematically, but it also lets your player look and feel smart. As for the bullywugs, roll an intelligence check. If they get a 14 or higher, they know the answer, and whoever gets the most right answers wins. The third game will be hide and seek for our sneaky player. Each seeker will have 5 minutes to find hiders inside designated zones throughout the encampment, and each participant will take 1 turn at being a seeker and 2 at being a hider. As a seeker, allow your player to make a series of survival, investigation, or perception checks in the 3 main areas the bullywugs could hide in. If your player's check beats the bullywug's stealth, they spot the bullywug. However, increase the DC by 5 if the bullywugs are in a different area than the player is currently in. And I'd limit the number of checks your players can make to 3, since we don't want this going on forever. Then, when your player is a hider, simply reverse the protocol. Contestants get a point for each person they successfully find and every time they successfully hide. And again, the most points wins. And finally, for your charismatic player, there is the challenge of praising the Lord of the Muck. The bullywugs and your chosen player will take turns showering Borgosh with compliments and rolling charisma checks to see how well they do. And you can dish out advantage or disadvantage as you see fit, leading to some quick and simple roleplay fun. And then Borgosh will say who he was flattered by the most in descending order. But after the final game, each team will be taken back to the pits and the winners will be declared. If your party wins, they can speak to Borgosh, but if they lose, the 2 bullywug teams in the pits will be ordered to kill your party. And to make combat extra fun, make sure to litter the Colosseum with swampy ponds your bullywugs can swim around in, and tall rocks for your bullywugs to jump up on so they have home field advantage. But after defeating the bullywugs, Borgosh will be impressed and will offer to speak with your party regardless, bringing this encounter to a cleaner conclusion. And so the croakolympiad will end and negotiations can finally begin. So, a series of playground Olympic games in a Frog King's court? I think this is all quite spicy enough. But if we wanted to, how can we make it even spicier? Well, another interesting bit of bullywug lore is they're known to steal magic items to further their status. So giving your bullywugs minor magic items could add extra fun during combat. Another idea is homebrewing a Lord of the Muck stat block and having him join the games. And finally, what if there were other prisoners competing in the croakolympiad? What extra twist could their existence bring? But anyways, this is just one of many ways you can use bullywugs in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But if you do use this in your future games, make sure to let me know how it goes. And of course, I'm always accepting challenges, so feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and indulging my hidden nerdy side.